to discuss how COVID-19 is changing the voting process for the primary election, which is on June 23rd. And our special guests for today to discuss this topic are Secretary of State Michael Adams and Fayette County Clerk Don Blevins Jr. We appreciate both these officials for taking the time to provide members of the Lexington business community with important updates. And I'm going to lead both officials through a Q&A based on the questions that we've already received. But if you have other questions, please check out the Q&A feature, which should be at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to ask those as well, time permitting. The first question I'd like to ask to Secretary Adams, can you walk us through the voting process for this primary? Tell us what's changed in Kentucky with the process for the primary election.
Sure, thanks, Carla. Well, there are 4 ways to vote. There's unfortunately a misunderstanding in some places that we've taken some people's rights away. That's the last thing we would ever do. It was important both to the governor and me, who worked together in a bipartisan way to ensure that we kept people safe, but also didn't let Mother Nature disenfranchise anybody. So we've actually done the opposite of taking rights away. We've expanded options. So there are 4 ways to vote. You can vote in person on election day. Obviously, we're not able to have as many locations as we did before coronavirus. We simply just don't have 3,687 precinct locations in Kentucky that can enable social distancing, that can fit the crowds that we're going to have, that will allow people to be 6 feet apart and so forth. And frankly, a lot of our locations canceled on us. They had no interest in being voting locations, given the possible liability they would face. So we had to significantly reduce the number of locations. We also don't have enough poll workers, not by a long shot. The governor and I twice extended the deadline to register poll workers, and they didn't show up. And a lot of them that did sign up canceled. We don't have enough PPE for all these sites and these workers and so forth and so on. So we are going to have election day on June 23rd, 6 to 6. It's in our state constitution. We're going to follow the Constitution. But absentee voting is also in our state constitution. It's a long established heritage of Kentucky, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. So there are 4 ways to vote. One is to vote in person on election day. Our preference is that people do that if they need to do that. If that is how they need to vote because of a disability that keeps them from voting absentee. But we encourage all voters, if they can avoid doing that and crowding these locations, to avoid crowding these locations. We're trying to avoid a Milwaukee situation where people are in line for 5 or 6 hours to vote. And it's going to be hot on June 23rd, presumably. So if you must vote in person, you can do so on election day. Another option you have is to vote early in person. Every clerk in the state is able to come up with their own schedule for how they're going to do that. We are asking voters to make appointments to do that. Unlike some of the big venues where we're having in-person voting on election day, the clerk's offices are just not designed for big crowds. We don't want big crowds showing up without notice. So we've asked voters to make appointments with their clerks for early voting. Under our rules, early voting will start no later than Monday, June 8th, 2 weeks before the election. They can start earlier if they choose. So the first way to vote, if you choose, is to vote in person on election day. Second way is to vote early in person. The third way is to vote absentee in person. By that I mean you can request your absentee ballot from govotekentucky.com, our online portal that serves the entire state, govoteky.com. You can get your absentee ballot there, and then you can drop it off at the clerk's office. The State Board of Elections is providing drop boxes, secure drop boxes to every clerk so the voters can get their ballot delivered by mail, vote at home, and then drop that ballot off at the clerk's office. That way they have the personal satisfaction of knowing that ballot was received. Some folks don't trust the mail system. So there are 3 ways to vote in person, essentially. The 4th way to vote is to vote by mail. We're paying for the postage. If you go to govoteky.com, you can get your ballot that way, or you can get it from emailing, calling, or faxing your clerk, or going in person if the clerk is open. Obviously, we're trying to limit the demand on the clerks right now, who are not just handling this election, but also all the other responsibilities. So the best way to vote, we encourage everyone to do it if they can, is to go to govoteky.com. You got to prove your identity. We can't just be mailing ballots out to the phone book. You got to prove who you are to get a ballot. But once you do that by providing your date of birth and your social security number, you can get a ballot mailed to you, and you can fill it out at home safely while you're at home anyway, most likely. And then you can mail it back to your clerk at our expense. It's postage prepaid, or you can bring it back yourself.
Great. Thanks, Secretary Adams. Just as a follow-up to you, you touched on this a little bit, but is there a reason why we didn't just mail everybody a ballot? And then can you talk a little bit about how Kentucky compares to what other states are doing?
Sure. So to your first question, it wouldn't have been responsible to simply mail a ballot out to everyone for a few reasons. One reason is it would have been extremely expensive. It costs about $1 to mail one of these out. Even if we didn't pay for the postage for it to come back, which is another $1, you're talking about 3.4 million registered voters. You're talking about $6.8 million if you mail it out and pay to mail it back. That's about as much as a regular election costs if you don't have poll workers and locations and all the other things you have for an election. So we do have federal funds that we've drawn on to help cover some of the costs of this election. But that would have spent all the federal funds we have and then quite a bit more at a time that we're actually trying to reduce our spending because of the revenue shortage, the capital. So it just wouldn't have been feasible cost-wise to simply mail ballots out to everybody. Another reason is ballot integrity. Something I inherited in this position when I was sworn in 4 months ago is voter rolls that are out of compliance with federal and state law. A federal judge sitting here in Frankfurt found that we had voters on our rolls who shouldn't be on our rolls as a matter of law. They've died, they've moved away. It's going to take some time to get these rolls cleaned up, but it would have been really irresponsible for us to mail ballots out to all these people who aren't legal voters and are scheduled to be removed.
And then just touch briefly on how we compare with other states, what other states are doing.
Oh yeah, so I've come in for a great deal of criticism from within the Republican side. I will tell you, I'll be very frank. I'm not a fan generally of ballots by mail. Under the circumstances, really was the only option that we had is to make this available to people who want to take advantage and to press people to do so if they can. But it's not an idea that I came up with out of the sky. What we're doing here in Kentucky, a red state with a Republican Secretary of State, it's exactly what they're doing in other red states with Republican Secretaries of State. I've had a lot of conversations the last 2.5 months with my colleagues of both parties, more so the Republicans. I just know them a little better. And this is what they're doing. It's been a little less controversial in their states, but they're doing this, or they're doing a more centrist or left-leaning version of this. A lot of them don't have the ballot integrity provisions I built into our system in their own systems. Washington State has a Republican Secretary of State that's just mailing ballots to the whole voter file. In Ohio, a red state with a Republican governor and Secretary of State, they closed in-person voting except for people who were disabled or homeless. I didn't do that. I let everybody vote if they want to vote in person. We tried to dissuade that, but we didn't limit it. They pushed everyone else into voting by mail. So my colleagues, even the Republicans, are actually doing more centrist or left-leaning versions of Election Day than I am. We've got probably the most conservative version of Election Day of any state in the country that's not held their primary yet, following, say, Super Tuesday when coronavirus really hit.
Great. Mr. Blevins, Secretary Adams has provided an excellent overview kind of from a statewide perspective. Can you drill down a little bit about what Fayette Countyans can expect, what the changes are, and just how the process will work through your office? Oh, I can't hear you.
Thanks for having me. Now that I know how to unmute. I want to follow up on what the Secretary said and really emphasize we really need to be voting by mail here. We also really need to use the portal govoteky.com. We should say that over and over again. Yesterday, we were unable basically to function in my election department because the phones were ringing off the hooks for all the confusion that Secretary Adams was talking about, where people were confused that, oh, I need to order my ballot right now. And it was a crazy day. Today it's a little better, but I really appreciate nobody calling the office. We can't handle the volume. You've got to use the portal. So with that caveat, we'll talk about the 4 methods of voting, but be specific to Fayette. He mentioned in-person voting on election day. I want to emphasize what he's already mentioned. We can't be doing that. We're going to offer it because it's legally required. I differ with the Secretary a little. If I had a choice, we would have 0 locations on election day, because the more we have, the more the people will show. There's a few, I guess, hard-headed folks out there that still believe they want to vote in person and that coronavirus is no big deal. So we will have one spot in Fayette County. It's going to be at formerly Commonwealth Stadium, but now called Kroger Field. We're going to be on the south side. There's 2 gates there that we'll have opened. We'll have 2 lines at once simultaneously that will snake under the stadium and then go into an interior room to vote. You'll then snake back out of the stadium, hopefully socially distanced the whole way. We're hoping to have fewer than, say, 4,000 or 5,000 people show up that day. It's very unpredictable right now. Had you told me that I would have 21,000 ballot requests already yesterday, I would have gone, no way. Well, we did. I don't have today's number. I wish I did. It's probably closer to 25,000 people have already requested a ballot. So that's the fantastic news. That's what we want. So we don't want people going to Kroger Field on election day, but that is what we're offering for those who really need it. And that's a very few people in Lexington. Secondly, to vote in person by appointment. In our view in Fayette County, that's really meant for people who need it, specifically our disabled community. If you need assistance in voting independently, that's what this is going to be for. We're going to host that out at the Senior Center starting on June 8th. The Senior Center out behind Southland Christian Church on Richmond Road. We'll do it by appointment. And again, it's meant for those that are disabled so that we can clean the machines. There's special machines we'll have for the disabled community to use. Most of us never pay attention to them, but they've always been in the precincts. They're just rarely used. So that's what that location will be. We've already covered voting by mail, which is govoteky.com over and over. You all help me. That's our mantra for the next month. And then you have until June 15th to do that. Our drop-off location that Secretary Adams mentioned, we aren't doing that at my office. My office is not conducive to any of this. The building stinks, frankly. It's an old building. It is what it is. So instead, we're going to do something kind of cool. There's the President's Pavilion that's right next to the stadium, next to Kroger Field, right next to the area where we'll be voting on Election Day. Starting on June 15th, we'll allow drop-off there. And you can just drive through. There will be signage to drive through. You drop your ballot and go. So for those that want to take that option, we will have that capability available. So that's pretty much where we are. I'll turn it back to you, Carla.
Great, thank you. That was very helpful. With the changes that both of you have described, if both of you could talk a little bit about the speed with which you think the ballots will be counted and the results will be reported. How long will we have to wait until we know who's won the primary elections?
Well, from a statewide basis, I'll say this. We've looked to Wisconsin as what not to do. Wisconsin, one of the things that they did is they actually prohibited any release of any results until a week after Election Day. We're not going to do that. We're going to release results as we've got them. The short answer is it depends. If a lot of people vote absentee, if they get their ballot now, if they send it back fairly promptly, starting June 1st, under our new rules, our counties are allowed to begin processing those absentee ballots. They're not going to report any results, obviously, but they can begin processing them. If they're able to keep up with the demand, we actually could have our results on election night because we'll already have had those ballots processed. And then it's just a matter of adding those up to the in-person numbers. We did allow for people to mail a ballot back up to Election Day. If we get a ballot by June 27th with a postmark of June 23rd or earlier, we will count that ballot. If you have some close races and a lot of mail-in at the very end, then we might have some races that we can't call until a few days after the election, maybe even the first part of the week after the election. I don't think that'll be the case in most races. I think for the most part, we'll have enough numbers in early enough that we can present those and people can make projections. We don't issue projections. We don't call races. We just provide the information. So I do think there may be some races that are close that will hinge on ballots that have been issued and not yet received back. We do track every single request and whether that ballot has been returned or not. So it should be a matter of public record at that point, how many outstanding ballots there are and where they are. And so certain candidates can follow that and then decide if they want to concede or not concede a race. I think for the most part, our elections will be clear on election night, but there will be a few that'll take a few days.
Mr. Blevins, any other points you want to make on that?
Well, I think Secretary Adams is being a little optimistic, in my opinion. Here's why. We had a conference call with some folks from Colorado. They said after 10 or 12 years of doing what we're trying to do in 2 months, they've got it down to where only 25% of their ballots come back on election day. So if that happens to me in Fayette County, that's 25,000 ballots. We can't do that election night. It's not going to happen. If it trails in over the next few days, it's still going to take us a few days. I worry we can do interim results. It'll be kind of, I guess, entertaining. But at the same time, I fear that would be very misleading. If you see 40% of the ballots returned and somebody's, ahead, that may not hold by the time we're done counting. When I asked Colorado what it was like their first election, they said nearly 40% of the ballots came back last minute. If that happens in Fayette County, I'm anticipating about 40,000 ballots. It will take us a solid 4 or 5 days to get through that many ballots, even at max staffing, which I've got planned for that. So I think I am staffed to deliver the final election results on June 30th, like we are all planned, but it's not going to be election night and probably not for a couple of days later. It's going to take a while. Jefferson will be even worse.
As a follow-up, Secretary Adams, you mentioned Wisconsin. I'm from Wisconsin originally, so I've been following.
No disrespect meant.
No, you're exactly right. It's been a mess. The other mess, in addition to making thousands of people wait in line for hours and not social distance, is that some of the ballots are not postmarked. Is that a concern in Kentucky if you're saying be postmarked by a certain date, but for whatever reason, I guess in Wisconsin, the post office didn't postmark them, so they have thousands of ballots that they don't know if they were submitted in time or not. Would that be an issue here?
Well, yeah, this is a real concern I have. We are going to encourage people to vote before the last minute. If a ballot is received by election day, obviously it was sent before election day, and we're going to count that. So the easiest way to ensure that there's no discrepancy or a lack of confidence in your ballot being legit is to vote a little earlier than June 23rd instead of waiting till the last minute.
I can confirm that in Fayette County, every election we get a whole bunch of ballots with no postmarks. I know that the state board has been in touch with the post office, and they're going to try extra hard to get postmarks on them this year, or for this particular election in addition. However, we do need to make some decisions about which way we're going to go. So for example, I would think that a ballot received in the mail on the Wednesday after election day, so the 24th, would by logic have to have been mailed on the 23rd or before. Now after that, you get a little bit more iffy. Secretary Adams, it would be nice if the state board weighed in on this and probably gave us all a policy one way or another. Otherwise, your county boards are going to have to vote to decide how to handle that situation. My county board has voted to do what I just described.
Yeah, I agree with you, Clerk Blevins, and I've asked the board actually to take up also issuing statewide standards, universal standards for signature matching and curing. I don't want to have an equal protection problem of two signatures that are similar and one gets accepted by one county and one not by another county. And so we certainly want to delegate a lot of this to the clerks and let them make their own decisions about where the best locations are and how to run their own elections on the ground. But I do think we need some statewide standards on your issue and others as well.
Great, thank you. This question also is for both of you. We'll start with Mr. Blevins. How do you anticipate the changes that we're having for this primary affecting voter participation?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. A lot of people think that there are those who think that we'll have a lower turnout because the presidential race is largely decided. Some folks feel that the races for our Senate race are largely decided. I don't know if I agree with that, but these are opinions that are out there. So that would argue that it would be lower. On the other hand, nearly every state that has done vote by mail, essentially more or less what we're doing, the turnout has gone up dramatically. I just saw an article over the weekend, in fact, that Pennsylvania had some strong surprises. They were expecting this many votes and got nearly double that. So all the clerks across the state are being encouraged to plan for a much heavier turnout. In Fayette County, 4 years ago, we voted 60,000 people in person. This time I'm planning for 100,000 ballots. If we go up to say 120, I should be okay. I think I have the capacity for that. Beyond that would be a force majeure, as they say, an act of God. So we'll deal with it if it happens, but I'm hoping my estimates are good.
Secretary Adams, did you have any thoughts on voter participation?
Yeah, I agree with Clerk Blevins. We don't really know yet. We'll have a better sense of turnout once the portal's been up longer and we get a sense of how many requests there are for ballots. We'll also have a better sense when people have made appointments with county clerks to vote in person early. We'll have a better position to make a projection. Normally, in a presidential primary like this, when there's no actual primary really to be had, you have low turnout, maybe 15-20% is what you typically see in a primary. We don't have any big ticket race that's drawing people out with the woodwork necessarily, so normally it would be low. But on the other hand, as Clerk Blevins said, states that have expanded their absentee voting have had an uptick in turnout overall. If I had to guess, I think turnout would be pretty low among Republicans. They don't have a Senate race primary that's competitive to vote in, and they tend to be more resistant to absentee voting. And so my guess is I think their turnout will be probably more static. I think Democratic turnout will go up. A, they've got a Senate race to vote in, and B, they're just more comfortable with voting by mail. That's actually part of their platform. And so my guess is in Democratic counties, you'll see turnout really through the roof, and Republican counties less so.
Secretary Adams, you'd mentioned the need for ballot security and how conscious you are of that. I've actually referred a couple people to govoteky.com. They were a little concerned about the security of a different kind, and that is identity theft. You do have to type in your social security number, your birth date. Can you just give a little bit of information about the encryption or just what has been done to help ensure that people's personal information will be secure?
Sure. Well, what we're doing with this portal is following existing law. You already have to provide your personal information to apply for an absentee ballot. This is not a new invention. We've had absentee balloting in our state constitution for decades and in our state laws for many decades. And you have to provide this information that way. So obviously, it's something that we've managed to secure. You've not seen identity theft. On the other hand, typically we have 2% of our voters vote absentee, and now, gosh, it could be half or more. I'd say it's going to be half or more in every county. It could be 80-90% in some places. I will confess, I didn't build the website. I don't manage the website. I got called in to see the website 30 minutes before it launched. So I don't have personal knowledge of all of the structures of that. But here's what I can tell you. All of that information is aggregated by the State Board of Elections, and then it is issued to the county clerks. They're the ones who actually receive the information. I certainly don't have access to any of that. My staff don't. This is really, when we call it a portal, it's literal. Like literally, it's a transmission device that takes information from the voters and then directs it to the clerks. So I'm sure our clerks have hired people of the highest personal character and caliber, and everyone's information will be kept secure.
Carla, I can probably speak to at least the Social Security aspects of it. Several years ago, the state's voter registration system was replaced, and the new system was built in such a way as to not be centric or centered on the Social Security number. We assign voter identification numbers to everybody. So what's happening when you're logging into the portal is that your Social Security number, hopefully you have your driver's license as well, a couple other pieces of information, they go directly into the voter registration system to make sure you are who we think you are. And then once that's done, your social's thrown away, and we only work with your voter ID. So it should be okay.
Great. Well, I've already signed up, so I have faith in both of you. This question is for both of you, and I'll start with Mr. Blevins. Do you anticipate that these changes, I know we've talked about them just being for the primary, but as to where we'll be with COVID-19 in November, but do you anticipate these changes staying in place for the general election, and a decision will be made on that?
Well, that decision will be at the state board and the governor's level, possibly even with the legislature, or possibly even with the courts. Just going to throw it out there that my crystal ball doesn't go beyond about a month. I think it would be appropriate for us to plan for COVID to be coming back strong in November and be prepared for that. I think that's an appropriate decision. I will say this, I think we are going to be able to pull off this primary the way we've designed it, but it is at absolutely the outer limits of what nearly every clerk can do under the current systems and circumstances. I'm having to hire a bunch of extra people to do this. There becomes a limit on the number of bodies you can throw at a problem, though, and we're kind of there. So if we're going to try this again in the fall, forgetting the politics of it just for a second, just logistically, if we're going to do this, it's going to have to be very different and with a lot of automation. We need better signatures. Our signature databases are awful. We're not set up for it. So if we really want to do great signature matching, we need to automate it, and we need to get good signature images. Some states, for example, send out an image card every year. They send you a card, you sign it in a box, and you send it back. And those cards are mass scanned, so that becomes the signature they use. It's built for that purpose. We don't have any of that in place. So if we vote 100,000 in the spring, or excuse me, now summer, I'll definitely vote probably close to 200,000 in the fall. That's just overwhelming. I'm not sure we could do it with the current technology.
Secretary Adams.
So when the governor and I agreed jointly to delay the election from May 19th to June 23rd, state law allows us to jointly do that, delay an election for up to 5 weeks. Our hope, of course, was that coronavirus was going to go away. This was back in mid-March. Obviously, it didn't. And we took advantage of that 5 weeks additional to plan the logistics around a different manner of an election. And we're going to learn lessons from how it goes. We're going to see if we have problems with the portal, if we have problems with ballots getting lost, if we have problems with ballots never being received, if we have problems with in-person voting and the crowds. We're going to learn from all of it. There's no perfect system for an election. Every election has human error. Every election has close races. Every election has disputes. We expect all of that this time. We just had no other option. But November is so far in the future, it's very difficult for me to make any sort of projection about what we should do. Certainly my default position is we'll have a normal election, but I don't have the crystal ball either, and I can't tell you what the world's going to look like at that time. I will tell you that as a matter of law, all the changes that have been made for June 23rd expire on June 23rd. Then we go back to normal. As a default, we have traditional elections. The only way that would change, to the point Clerk Blevins made, would be either I would make a recommendation to the governor for specific changes that would start with me. The ball would be in my court. If I didn't make such a recommendation, there would be no change to occur unless the courts were brought in and made their own decisions and changed things around. I don't like that. Part of why I made my own agreement with the governor was so that democratically elected people in charge of elections could make these decisions instead of people in robes who don't have any experience or expertise in elections. I don't think the judges should decide our election policies. I think the elected officials should. So we'll wait and see. I don't think that we have to make any decisions right now. We're going to assess what works and doesn't work, and we'll chew on that, and then we'll make plans for November.
Great. We don't have any additional questions from the listeners, so I'd like to just give you guys a few minutes each to give any closing remarks, anything that we didn't cover that you think voters should be aware of, a chance to plug the website one more time, and any other resources, electronic or otherwise, that you think would be good to point out to people as we kind of navigate this new process. I'll start with Mr. Blevins.
Okay, just want to reemphasize that we really want people to use the portal and to vote by mail. That's the #1 way to do it. It will keep us all safe and hopefully get us back to normal sooner by doing all our practices of safe at home and safe at work. We just put up today a website, lexingtonky.gov/vote. That has the information that's specific to Lexington and Fayette County if folks want to go there. Don't really need to. The only thing you really need is govotky.com, and that takes care of just about everything for you. I would ask that you have patience no matter what county you're in. The county clerk right now, I guarantee you, is overwhelmed and way behind on making ballot packages. As I said at the start of the show here, I've already got 21,000 requests that we haven't yet begun on. We'll get to them. It's going to take us probably a week just to get that many out. So please be patient. You'll get it eventually. And then when it comes back, I promise it's going to be safe, secure, counted properly, all those good things. So let's vote by mail, and I'll see you on June 30th.
Great. Secretary Adams.
Well, I want to thank everybody for watching. I want to second everything Clerk Blevins said about if you can vote by mail, you should, or vote by drop-off, you should if you can. Don't make life harder on our poll workers and our disabled community and our homeless community by crowding the lines and putting people out in the sun for long hours. If you can avoid it, please do. We've made it as convenient as we can make it. I will add that there's a lot of misinformation being circulated. My office gets hundreds of calls a day with people with crazy information that's wildly wrong. They think we're having an online election, the portals where you cast your vote and so forth. A lot of the misinformation, I think, is well intended. It's just people heard a rumor and they're trying to help their neighbors know what to do. But if information is not coming from my office or from the clerks or from the State Board of Elections, it's probably wrong. My social media is pretty messy right now. I get all kinds of responses. Well, I heard someone said that this is the case. Well, that's great, but it's wrong. We'll tell you what the rules are. They're all posted at sos.ky.gov. Anyone can go read them. It takes about 5 seconds to pull it up. You can read the rules yourself. Our clerks are doing a great job of putting this information out there, letting their voters know. We're doing our best here in Frankfort to get the message out. When in doubt, listen to your public officials. And I also will add please be patient with us. We're doing our best in a crisis with a government structure that's not designed for this. The system is going to work. Everyone's vote's going to be counted. But be patient with us. We're doing our best under very difficult circumstances.
Thanks to both of you for spending some time with us this morning. I know time is a precious commodity for you both right now, and we also just greatly appreciate your public service during this difficult time. Patience for everybody is a good thing right now because businesses also are struggling with reopening and in just a new system. So it's difficult for everybody. We'll be sharing this webinar along with voting information with our members in our public policy email, which will be coming out later this week. So please feel free to share that communication with your networks. We want to make sure that people get accurate information. And if you haven't already, go vote ky.com. It takes like 2 minutes to register for your ballot. It's very easy. So I recommend that you do it. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.